This episode's made possible by Planful.
Hi, this is Josh Siegel, CFO of CyberArk, and you are listening to the CFO Thought Leader Podcast.
This is episode 944.
With the raise in interest rates and the cost of capital going up, everyone, myself and all my CFO peers, are out there saying, any money we're spending, we're better be spending it for a massive return, because the cost of capital is prime and premium, and we're all here to make those better business outcomes and better business decisions. And how do we partner with our CEOs and the business to deliver that? It's now more than ever more important.
Hi, it's Jack. On today's show, we speak with Anna Chadwick, CFO, Pitney Bowes. Back in 2020, when longtime General Electric veteran Anna Chadwick accepted a call from a recruiter, it would become the one call in a 3-decade-long career that ultimately resulted in an executive search fee. Still, while Chadwick would be any headhunter's prize placement, it's clear this career segue represented something far more substantive for the company she would be joining, Pitney Bowes, and the company she would be leaving behind, GE Capital. You'll hear that story and much more on today's episode. We'll begin after this.
Hi, I'm Rowan Tonkin, Chief Marketing Officer at Planful, and we're a proud sponsor of CFO Thought Leader. At Planful, we're empowering teams just like yours to drive peak financial performance in every corner of your business. What sets Planful apart? We have purpose-built applications for every department, from FP&A to accounting, marketing to HR, all with built-in financial intelligence. This means we can get you up and running within weeks, and it requires minimal IT involvement. So you can rapidly and seamlessly engage everyone across the business in your key financial processes. Best of all, you can't outgrow us. We take the pain of growing away with an unmatched ability to scale with you. You have an endless runway with Planful. See why over 1,300 customers around the world choose Planful as their flexible, user-friendly, end-to-end financial performance management platform. Go to planful.com and see how you can make financial performance a team sport in your business.
Hello, we're speaking with Anna Chadwick, CFO of Pitney Bowes. Anna, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Anna, as always, we're going to ask you to look back. And we're wondering, what were those experiences you feel prepared you to become a CFO? Take us back.
Absolutely. I'm going to take you actually way back. So I'll start by saying that I was born and raised in the island of Puerto Rico. And that foundation becomes critical into how I developed as a leader. And moments of that youth are important because I was benefited by strong family values, strong belief in education, and the desire from a very young age that I was going to go and study in the mainland United States. And all of those were grounded in me from a very young age. Upon graduating from university, I had the benefit of joining General Electric in some of the very elite training programs. So I joined the financial management program and later on their corporate auditing program. And what I mean, those programs were foundational to my ability to be sitting today where I'm sitting, is because they were incredibly competitive. They provided a lot of structure, a lot of feedback, a lot of role models. And I'll touch a little more later on the network and the mentors. But when you think about those programs, they were designed not because you were 2 years in the program. They were designed because you had to meet criteria to stay the next 6 months and the next 6 months. And you were promoted out of the program into the corporation, or you stayed learning in the program. So I benefited for 7 years of training. And I came out as an executive of the company. And other people who went with me in that journey today are the CFO of Boeing, the CFO of Delta, the CEO of Synchrony Financial, the CEO of Baker Hughes. Again, that's the network of people that I grew up with. And I can look back, and that becomes my network today. So that was incredibly instrumental. And I'll touch on a point here on diversity because I think it's very relevant. Inside of GE, where I spent 28 years of my career, by having gone through those training programs, the ticket to be at the table became higher. And what I mean by that is the competency part of what I can deliver was already checked off. Because not only did they know clearly what I was capable of, that many of them have also gone through the program. So that part was checked off. So when many times diverse talent have to overcome that presumption of competence, that was already taken care of. So then the discussion was, what is it in it for that next role for Anna's development? What is the right fit? So having spent 28 years in that environment really gave me a lot of confidence, gave me a lot of that training. And I go back to the network and gave me the network. And not just the network of mentors, but also those sponsors who, when I was not in the room, were willing to stick their neck out for me and give me that promotion. So that's a little bit about my background, and I'll touch on Pitney Bowes maybe a little later.
Yeah, well, thank you for a great overview for us. I want to point out to the listeners just the timing again. I believe it was 8 years at GE proper, let's say, and then you moved to GE Capital for the next 20. Do I have that about right?
Absolutely. That's right.
Would love to just talk to you about that initial 8 years at GE. This is a period that I know and many of us might have read about in Jack Welch's book. So much was about finance transformation. There was a lot of change happening as GE, as there always was, perhaps. But I know specific to that book, he's talking about the transformation underway to get finance to be more of a partner with the business. And there you are along the front lines. Did you feel like you were part of the transformation that was taking place? I mean, or are you really just too busy with your head down going through the training and what have you?
No, I absolutely felt included. I absolutely felt, and I think Jack did that really well at all levels. He talked all the way from everybody was valued. I mean, from a janitor all the way to that senior executive. And I had the opportunity to win an award and actually go to the Rainbow Room and have lunch with Jack. And it was only about 6 of us. So it was absolutely very much on point. The one thing that I want to mention about those experiences early on in that finance transformation, and this applies to the overall company culture transformation, that appetite for never-ending improvement grew in me from an early time. And whether you call it the principles of lean, the principles of Kaizen, but that process mindset, that desire to not have waste, to eliminate defects, and that is instilled in me in everything that I do. And when you have a problem, all you have to do is break down that problem. And if you go to the process, you immediately start identifying the root causes and all of those things. So I think that was a big part of the benefit and a big part of the finance transformation, but you can only be a better finance leader if you're close to your operations. And that was absolutely instilled in me from a very early part of my career at General Electric.
I want to just, again, try to get a sense of who you were way back when. You were in the Cincinnati office originally, is that right? And was that your home base for that 8 years pretty much? You did travel quite a bit, I imagine.
So this is a great question. So I moved from San Juan, Puerto Rico to Washington, D.C. for university. And then I moved from Washington, D.C. to the outskirts of Cincinnati, Ohio, Evendale, Ohio, where we have our GE Aviation aircraft engine facility. I spent 2 years there, and that was the time I spent on the financial management program. And as I moved to the corporate auditing program, this program, we were traveling for 4 months at a time. So I spent time in Erie, Pennsylvania, Melbourne, Australia. I spent time in all of India. I was an audit manager at the time between Delhi, Bangalore, Mumbai, and you were really living out of a suitcase. And you had a real address from a taxpayer perspective, but you were really traveling and meeting all these executives and learning about all the different cultures. And at the same time, in a short period of time, you had to learn the problem that you were addressing or the audit area that you were auditing, and the requirement was that at the end you left it better. So you needed to provide an insight at the end that the senior management would take an action from. And all of this rolled up to the audit committee of General Electric. So it was to be meaningful. And that felt like a lot of pressure on, let's say, the auditor or the advisory part of the role. But at the same time, you knew you had a short time. And I make an analogy. So people say, oh, it must have been beautiful. You grew up in Puerto Rico. You could go to the beach all the time. Well, I never went to the beach because I always knew the next day I could go to the beach. Now I come and I live here in Connecticut, and I love seasons because now I say, I better go skiing now. I better go to the beach now because time is going to run out. So my point on that is when you allow yourself in your career thinking that you have time to do things, you don't act as fast as when you think that time's running out. So that part of that intensity gave us an additional push to deliver a lot in a short period of time.
You know, what you just shared with us about sort of that you were expected to give a little input at the end. Is that just a 2-pager? You know, what exactly, or is it verbal, or is it something you'd have to actually file with the audit numbers?
No, it was in writing, and it had action items, and they were tracked at the very senior levels, but you had to earn that your action item was going to be there at the end, and you were being evaluated. Did you have the ability to provide that insight? And let me touch on insights because this is important from a CFO perspective. And I talk to my team about this all the time, and I'm going to give credit where credit is due. So I was talking to a good friend of mine, Andrew Young. He is the CFO of Capital One. And we were talking about how people spend time on reporting. And as we were talking, he says, and I use this quote now, I say, I want my team to spend less time reporting yesterday's news and spend more time crafting tomorrow's headlines. So in short, you say, we want to optimize our reporting, the time we spend on reporting. And we only report not because the report is our output, but what are the insights that provides us to push the organization to drive a change that is going to make tomorrow better. And that part of the cultural shift in organizations, many times people believe that, you know, this is what I need to do. These are my tasks. But when you believe that you have to add that value at the very end, which is really the ultimate goal, finance is here to deliver better business outcomes in the most effective manner. I always say better business outcome in the most effective manner.
So it sounds like the environment was very welcoming for those action items. In fact, it was an expectation, and because in politically sensitive office environments, sometimes you're sort of saying, well, this could be an area that needs to be improved upon. If I understand correctly, the type of input you're pointing at and saying, or why isn't it being done this way? I mean, wasn't it kind of a sensitive area for the audit team to do that? And what I'm guessing is that GE actually kind of flipped things and was like, no, it was kind of welcoming to that type of input. Or do I have it wrong?
So it was welcoming by the auditors, but when the auditors showed up, it was not always as welcomed by the management team. And this tended to be people between the 24 and 30 years old. So we were viewed as youngsters and almost prove to me that you know something because, I've been here forever. But that also brought in fresh perspectives. And I think all of that was part of the design of the program. So we were welcomed with cautious.
Jack Welch's personality. We mentioned the Rainbow Room lunch that you were invited to. Forgive me for asking this, but was there ever were you ever presenting or something? He was notorious, I think, for popping his head in the room when people were giving talks or presentations. And if it didn't happen to you, it probably happened to a colleague. I don't know. Can you share any of your insight there? His book came out in 2001, I believe. I remember it was right around 9/11 that his book debuted. It was sort of an important milestone in some ways, giving us an eye view into the GE that he wanted to put his thumbprint on at that time. That was the year also, I guess, he retired. So it was kind of interesting. Just timing it with your career. You were moving on at that year as well to GE Capital.
At that time, I was starting to migrate to GE Capital. So I'll share a comment he shared with myself and that small group that we were having that lunch, and that stuck with me forever. And he always had insights around leadership and your responsibility as a young professional being a leader and growing as a leader. And he said to the small group, you have a plant and you need to add water. Your responsibility is to add water. But your responsibility is also to know quickly when you don't. And what meaning he was trying to tell us, of course, is you go there and develop people. But you also need to have the insights to say, at what point do you cut it off? So, because we were all going up in that, we're growing, we're developing, we're growing, we're developing. His message to us is now, as a leader, you also need to make that tough call, and you need to make it quickly. So he always had those sound bites, and every time you were in the room with him, you kept a little message that sticks with you. Now I'm talking 25 years later.
Well, great share for us. Thank you. We're aware that GE Capital became really where so much of the finance talent, it was often the finance development talent for the greater GE organization. But we're curious about when it was time for you to accept a position there. What were you thinking? Did you feel like you're opening an entirely new chapter? One would think it was a milestone of sorts. What would you tell us?
So let me step back to those 5 years where I was traveling and seeing the different businesses. So I started in the industrial side in aviation, which I loved, high technologies and all of that. And I spent time at GE Lighting, at GE Appliances. But then my first assignment in Australia was at a credit card business we had bought that provided credit to a retailer. And when I fell in love with the fact that money was the product. And I realized that I have a passion around truly understanding how the product is manufactured, more than I did by tracking engineering hours or other things where others were making the product. So to me, that was the pivotal moment and at the time when you came off the audit staff, you could come off into a specialization area. You could come into healthcare, or you could come into GE Capital or power generation and so on. So I knew that was where I felt more passion. And I viewed it as, I'm going to GE Capital, but at any time I can go back to any of the industrial businesses. So let me try this out, only to know that passion was true and there. And then as you grow older in your career inside of GE Capital, your skills become a little less transferable. Finance is always transferable, but they become a little less transferable. So maybe to roll forward those 20 years just really quick, I spent time in credit card business in Connecticut. Then I was tapped on the shoulder and said, hey, you're ready for a CFO job. I was in my late 20s. I'm like, I'm in. Tell me about it. And they said, well, the ones in the US are a little too big. So I had some choices, and I ended up in Switzerland. So CFO of a a Swiss bank that was a composite of two acquisitions. And we were challenged as expatriates to grow it. And we did a really good job. Today, that is a publicly traded company in Switzerland called Sembra, and doing very well. Then they said, hey, we would like to use your language skills and the fact that you're a senior executive in the company as we grow in Latin America, where there's been a trajectory of starts and stops with compliance and other issues. We believe your presence there would be very valuable. So we moved to Mexico City. So from Zurich to Mexico City. Spent a couple of years there, and I quickly realized my travel was much easier out of Miami. So, but in that regional job, we grew the region. We grew through joint ventures, large joint ventures with Central American and Colombian banks, plus wholly owned operations. My career grew, and I continued to deliver. Financial crisis hits, and we were asked to sell our positions. And we did that. We did that very successfully. And I was called to come back to headquarters in Connecticut. And at that time, we had 3 kids, and we said, no, we need a little more stability. We can't just pack these kids around. They're getting a little older. So I became the CFO of Energy Financial Services. And that was about a $20 billion asset base, investing in pipelines. We had, of course, wind and solar, but we also had gas generation, and learning entirely new industry, deploying capital at times $500 million, $1 billion versus small ticket in consumer banking. Learned a boatload, and about 4 years into that role, maybe 5, then I was asked to do commercial lending and leasing. Again, stayed in Connecticut. We wanted to have a little bit of a priority around the family stability. And probably the most challenging role of my career started in 2014 when they announced the exit of GE Capital.
We can imagine. You mentioned Synchrony, whose CFO, Brian Wenzel, we had on the podcast. But that's the environment here. There are all these sales and spinoffs happening, and people who worked together for years are now being spun off in different entities.
But you stay with GE Capital, is that right? And was that a deliberate decision on your part? What would you tell us?
Absolutely, completely deliberate. So in 2014, when that announcement happened that we were really disbanding GE Capital, at that time, my good friends Brian and Brian over at Synchrony were already spun off. I had really 2 choices. Either I stay or I go. And I thought about this, and my passion and love for General Electric was so big. And myself having been in so many parts of the organization, I knew I could add a disproportionate amount of value to that next phase. So while I saw a lot of people early take out and go to new jobs, and they landed into glamorous, great jobs, I said, I'm gonna see this through. And I really like my decision, because as time progressed, we ended up executing over 50 divestitures globally. And as time progressed, some people went with the buyers, and then some people were left behind. And I became the leader of all of those that were kind of left behind. We were left behind with some assets that were not desired and some liabilities that were not desired, as well as with a significant amount of infrastructure. You call it legal entities, bank accounts. You can imagine it's the unwind of a very sizable organization. So because of my unique position, having been in Europe, Latin America, and traveled through Asia as well, I had built the network and the understanding at a more global nature. So when the time came, I was asked to really lead what we called Global Legacy Solutions, which was kind of a fancy word for the leftovers. and I embraced that. And I'm always a glass half full person, and I embraced it. And at the time, there were probably around 1,000 people left, including a piece of a bank over in Europe, that we had to work through and so on. So, but the point of that, it was why I said it was my biggest leadership challenge, because now I'm leading this team to zero. Our goal is to go to zero. And you have to lead with a lot of transparency. And you have to put metrics out there so that everybody understands how you're making progress. But I was able to rally this group to say success is to get to zero. And by the way, because you see the milestones, you know more or less when you're leaving, and I'm going to help you land a job outside. So it became a really nice relationship team that we were there to support one another and delivering in this mission that was going to add value to GE as a company, because the faster we got rid of this infrastructure, assets, and liabilities, the more value we were providing to our parent. So I created a vision around feeling good about what we were doing. And that was probably my biggest leadership challenge.
Wow. I mean, that really was. I mean, I have to believe that people are being recruited away. Some of your best people or people you relied on are getting calls from recruiters, as were you. I mean, what kept you there?
So I'll tell you what kept me going. And recruiters did call. And I always said to myself, am I developing? Am I growing? Am I learning? And to the extent that I could satisfy that, GE was a very big world. So the moment when I made that decision to leave was the moment that I said, I'm getting to the point where my personal growth is stalling. And I knew at my level of seniority that my growth could continue in the industrial side. But by then, there was new leadership and they were looking for deep industry expertise, which is very respected. And my industry expertise was in financial services. So I knew my time was getting close. So as the opportunity and the phone rang around having the position of public company CFO, that was a big attractive factor. Then when I learned it was Pitney Bowes, a very reputable, established company with strong, deep values, very similar to those that I had at GE, that was another plus. And then the third one was a company under a transformation. And nothing more did I want to be, and do I want to be, than a company that's delivering something, it's not status quo. And so it was incredibly appealing, those three factors. It was public company, so it was a step up. It was a reputable company with good integrity, good values, and going a transformation. So as I sit here a little over 2.5 years later, those three factors are amazing and there. And then I've learned more. It's a company with great technology, a great amount of innovation, and a lot of things that we have as we look here into our future.
Well, many of us just think of it as a global shipping and mailing company. It's been that forever. But having visited the site, I realized, wow, there is a lot of transformation happening here. And if you wouldn't mind, for those of us who might not be clued in on some of the transformation afoot there, can you share with us what is this chapter that you have just become part of and are now helping lead?
Right. So this chapter actually began before my arrival here. But if you take it as a problem statement, Pitney Bowes has been, and historically had been even more, heavily invested in the mailing. And by mailing, I differentiate from shipping. Mailing is more letters. And the company started as a production of indicia, which is that little red print that mass produced by a meter. So it's really the production of mass stamps. And as we all know, everywhere in the United States and around the world, everybody wants to move to digital. Now you don't pay your credit card via check and you put a stamp and you mail it. You get a digital statement and you actually do a bank transfer. So more and more, the mailing part of the house is, as a market, is shrinking. So with that problem statement, and there's a lot of sub pieces to our business, the innovation that started rising, or maybe not, the innovation came a little later, but the idea is, hey, we're good at mailing, we can be good at shipping. And there are adjacencies, and we have a strong relationship with the United States Postal Service as over 103 years ago, being the first to innovate around the meter. So the company today is here to solve the complexities of shipping and mailing, and we provide technology, and we provide financial services in doing so, and a complete suite of products to our customers. And the company operates in 3 segments. We have our sending technologies division. We pre-sort first-class marketing mail and letters on behalf of the United States Postal Service. And we do so also in our global e-commerce segment, which is our fastest growing, around parcel sortation. And we use the USPS for the last mile delivery. So we have seen revenue growth. We have seen a lot of good developments happening here. And part of the transformation where we're in now is making that revenue growth be profitable. And that's really the ultimate goal here for our total shareholder return. And we're in that process and in that journey.
And I should point out that you arrived, it's nearly 3 years ago now, I think, you stepped into the role. Can you share with us, as you arrive, do you reorganize finance? Is there anything that you do that, in some fundamental way maybe changes things a little bit?
Yes, so absolutely. Any new CFO arrives, makes an assessment, and puts a path forward, not only as a partner to your CEO from a business perspective, but as you look at your own finance organization and how they deliver those better business outcomes. So the first thing was really gathering with my leadership team, understanding where we are in our journey of finance as a function. And the way I think of the journey has really about 3 pieces. So an organization can be out there being doing their thing, being very transactional, being effective in terms of closing the books and doing what needs to be done. Then an organization moves on and says, hey, could some of this work be done in a more productive manner? Many organizations went out and outsourced. Many organizations went out and centralized different things. And then you move on to, hey, automation. And then you get to some higher levels of automation by having some bots, the robots and those things. And then the ultimate thing where we all want to get to is not just that automation, but that automation happening on its own, like having more of that artificial intelligence and those things. So we needed to assess where we were in that journey and make sure that we were not only moving in the right direction, but the rate and pace of change that our organization can tolerate. So we spend a lot of time creating the need, and we developed internally what we call Finance Forward. So it was our way of communicating through that. And Pitney Bowes was probably a little bit on the earlier stages of that journey, being a 103-year-old company. And I got here during COVID, so people were working from home. So it's harder to drive change. Where we are today, roll forward 2.5, almost 3 years later, is we've created a center of excellence or a global business shared services as a more standalone function. Again, nothing that many companies haven't done before, but we were a little bit later in the game in getting that up and running. And we're in the process of that, and we're pretty far along. We have deployed more robot automation. But what was interesting, and I think this is an important point, when we created that shared services, we touched a lot of processes. And as you know, I'm a very process-oriented person, and I was out there beating the drum on, does that process need to be done? Can it be eliminated? Because many people, again, they're working from home. They're doing what they're being asked to do. But sometimes you lose perspective of what comes before you in that process and what comes after you in that process. So you might still be doing the report that you're being asked to do, but guess what? The process changed and that report might no longer be needed. But we didn't have the moments before to question those things. And this presented that opportunity. And as we move into that last leg of the journey, or as I know it today, I'm sure there'll be a new last leg, is all around organizing your data in a way and your systems in a way that they can actually do more for you, and over time, hopefully leverage not just automation, but smartness in how data interacts between each other.
How did you, when you arrive, was there an urge to get data smart? Okay, who are the data people here? Where are they? And when do I have the opportunity to begin a discussion with them about our needs? And so I can discover where we are sort of along the data integration trail.
No, I think it's a really good question. And I would say I took one step before that, which was more process. I started with the process, and now we're really embarking into the data aspects of it. And the reason why I needed to start in the process, I think there was a lot of compartmentalization in the organization. And a lot of that compartmentalization was exacerbated during COVID. So absolutely, data is the key into the future. And I would say it's very often very complicated for finance. And finance as a function likes to please the growth and the front end, and many times at the expense of the back office. And as a cultural mindset, we need to start being more in the forefront of the design of those new products so that we can actually architect the processes to be efficient and the data to work better for us. And that's part of that cultural shift that we're in.
Wanted to just ask you, as we talk to finance leaders, we always ask them about their top of mind metrics. It kind of makes us understand this is the nature of this business. We speak to a lot of software application vendors who are always talking about their unit economics, SaaS numbers, and what have you. Reveal your world a little bit to us. What are the top of mind metrics? What is it that you're looking at before your first cup of coffee? Is there a number or something you're tracking very closely?
Yeah, so listen, it all starts with the top line. And as I mentioned, we have 3 segments. So it's not a monoline business, but I definitely look at parcel volumes. I definitely look at mailing volumes. And then from there, you start looking at some of the efficiencies. Those become a little bit more internal metrics that we've self-defined. But from a macro perspective and from an outside-in perspective, then if I care about parcel volumes, of course, I care about what are retailers doing, what are consumers doing. I also care about different things that are happening in the macro environment at the moment. When you have elections or other things, your volume patterns change. And the benefit we have is really we have a set of experts in our organization that have been in this business for a long time. So there's a lot of that happens by nature. But a lot of these things are very specific to different business models. And what I would say is where I want to get to is to find metrics. So where I would like to take our organization in finance with metrics is in the forecasting. And what I mean by that, I would love to find metrics of correlations that provide that additional insight that will help us make better decisions in our front end, in our forecasting. And I think those are the nuggets and the things that we all need to be in the pursuit of those things. And I think with data and the organization of that data in the world, there will be more things that correlate that we haven't even thought of yet.
Is there a particular metric that perhaps your team would tell us that Anna's going to ask about this? Is there a metric that maybe was just not getting the attention you felt it deserved and needed to have its profile raised, perhaps with just one part of the organization or one, they needed to understand better why it was significant. And I could draw up 20 scenarios for you, but I'm looking for that one number that maybe you realized we got to talk about this more often.
Yes. So I'll share one that we've been deep in the journey on. And in our parcel sortation business, we really needed to get down to unit economics. And in those unit economics, and this has been a collaboration between the operations team, the finance team, and really the company at large, was really being able, and we look at this on a daily basis, being able to say, hey, if I charge for a package X dollars on average, what are my unit costs? So then you say, how much do I spend on labor in that unit? How much do I spend on transportation in that unit? How much of my warehouse cost is spent on that unit? How much of the automation that I've invested in is spent on that unit? And this was very instrumental for the finance function to play a leadership role in helping and working with operations. And the junction of those two groups have developed an incredible amount of more transparency. And where that transparency comes in plays a really huge role is in pricing. So now that you have that visibility, you can actually now make better pricing decisions. So I hope it gives you a flavor of the types of things we're dealing with here at Pitney Bowes.
I want to just quickly touch on AI with you and how it's likely to impact this business. I think I read something about Pitney Bowes, exploring the use of self-driving trucks or something in a limited fashion. But there's so many areas that it could impact the business, I'd imagine, particularly when you're, the logistics piece of this. What would you share with us, about your mindset as AI and the conversations you're having this year? I imagine they're quite accelerated compared to when you first arrived in regards to AI and how it's going to change the business.
Yes, so I think AI is absolutely a topic of discussion all the way from the boardroom to the people that are asking questions to ChatGPT and other forms of AI. And we spend time, and I want to bifurcate it because I do think it's important as a CFO to touch on governance. And there's a huge aspect of governance and making sure that you put the right boundaries on how it can impact your organization, your systems, and different things. So I'll put that aside for a second, and I'll talk about the more fancy and sexier parts of AI. Listen, the sky's the limit. You touched on, autonomous driving. We do have a lot of transportation. There's line hauls, there's couriers, and that industry is going to get disrupted. And if we're not there understanding those trends and those patterns and doing some pilots to understand what it could mean, we're missing the boat. So we're picking a few nuggets of areas where we're spending a prudent amount of money because in the scheme we're a small player, but we need to keep an eye out there on the changes that are coming and make sure we have access to those markets and those trends as they materialize. I think it's a mistake to we want to be a fast follower, a fast adopter. I'm at our size, we're not going to be at the forefront of that development, but you need to keep that pulse, and you need to find the ways to invest at the right amounts of capital for your size to ensure you're a player in the future.
Would it be, say, generative AI and the customer relationship
area? Would that be the most obvious, prominent area, or am I missing another aspect of this business?
So I think that customer, absolutely. I also think that the way we move a package around our network, there's optimizations to be had there. Those are probably the two ones that come maybe at the top of my head. There's a lot of technology in what we do. And what I love about this business is that I don't have only one lever to make it better. You can change a route. You can change how a parcel or a letter moves. You have technology on how you replenish a meter with the cash that the clients pre-deposit. So there's a lot of areas here, and we're really at the early stages. I do think that there's an outside-in view that we need to bring in as we upskill our talent, but also as we bring in new talent into the organization. So the talent component, at the end of the day, we all are HR people because human resources is the number one resource that we have. And a combination of that resource as we think of the talent that we're bringing into the organization will be what helps us unlock some of these things as we move forward.
Very interesting. Thank you for that. We're now up to what we refer to as our finance strategic moment question. And we ask finance leaders just to look back in time and choose just one moment of strategic insight that they experienced because of their lines of sight into the business and their ability to see things. Anything you'd share with us in regards to a finance strategic moment?
So I mentioned a little bit about my time at GE Capital in that transformation that we did with the exit of GE Capital. What I want to do is take you back to the time when I was in Switzerland. And when I was in Switzerland, to set the stage, there were 3 expatriates, and we were sent there because the business ran really well. It was a very well-run business, and it was a combination of a bank. It had auto leasing and lending. It had personal loans, and it was very profitable. And every time the headquarters said, "So what's next?" they said, "More auto loans, more auto leases, and we're still very profitable." But that was not enough. So they brought a few of us, a little bit of disruptors, to think of what the possibilities could be out there. And we were sent out there, and this was 2003, 2004. And if you remember, mortgages were growing, were booming. And there was an implicit understanding that we're going to plant mortgages in every one of these banks that we have around the world. And this is where the interesting and the insightful part comes in. As we're doing the analysis on mortgages, the local management team was saying mortgages don't make sense in Switzerland. People inherit houses, the market behaves different. There's rules around if you have a capital gain in a short amount of time, what happens with that gain. And as we started kind of going into and truly understanding the market, I was probably one of the first ones to say, hey, we came to the conclusion that there's something here into what they're saying, but it was not getting translated properly. And here's why I don't think it was getting translated properly, because they would say no, but they didn't give an option. They didn't say no, but we can do this. And that's where it became interesting. When I got there, we had just done an extra acquisition on auto leasing and lending, and everybody welcomed that because it's more of the same, but it also helped us grow. But what we did is we said, hey, mortgages don't make sense, but guess what? Credit cards make sense. And we partner with a local, it was like equivalent of a Walmart. It was a supermarket, multi-store. And we launched our first credit card product, and we did it pretty quickly. It took about a year and a half of development. And as I was leaving, the product was getting launched because I mentioned I moved to Mexico City for my next assignment. But I would say today, when you look at the publicly traded company, a big part of the value was that creation of that new market and the new segment. So I mentioned that as a transformative moment. Again, it was a team of 3 of us. We were viewed as these are the 3 foreign ones that are coming to rock this place and change this place, and we don't want this change necessarily. And they were right, because the implicit change was not the right change, but the cultural component of the listening and the understanding is so important. And at times, when you're so removed from the headquarters, you lose a lot in that translation. But the good thing is we found that other path, and it was incredibly well executed, and it developed the growth that was requested and required.
From episode 769, this is 1 Minute with Harold Chen, CFO of Blovin.
We went public in April. Simultaneous with that, we acquired a $1 billion software company in Germany at the same time. Most people wouldn't try to do that. We just closed on another $1 billion transaction on January 1st of this year. And the reason we can do that is because of the execution capabilities of the company, but also just the clarity of strategic thought. Very few, if any, of these deals were intermediated by bankers. These were all generally founders that we knew and CEOs that we knew that wanted to be part of the AppLovin programs.
We always like to ask you to look back again with this first question. And we're wondering the first time you stepped into a CFO role, and it was at GE, and you did this time and again, you stepped into new roles. For those CFOs who are stepping into a new role for the first time, stepping into a CFO role for the first time, what is that piece of advice if you could go back in time and just give yourself as this added responsibility falls on your shoulders, as you're more, perhaps independent, but along with that comes a lot of responsibility? What would you share with us? What is it that you would tell yourself?
Yeah, so there are 3 basic things. First, take every role and make it half glass full. You go through that assessment phase, and then you find all the problems. You got to switch immediately to saying, how can I help and how can I contribute to this? So that's the first thing that I would say. I always, and that I would say it's kind of that assessment of the problem. And I go into saying, you always have to understand the problem. So I'm moving into 2, create a vision and rally your team around that. And that's, you would do that whether you're a CFO or whether you're taking on any other new role. In that process, I would say, get yourself in those uncomfortable moments, because that's the only time you're learning. And those are the moments when you go and state that problem, create that vision, break it down, and rally the people. And then the third thing I would say is, don't underestimate the power of your network. And I'm sure we'll talk more about the network here in a second. But reach out and have the confidence to say, I don't know it all, and I want to reach out for an advice, or I need a sponsor, or I need just coaching. Or at the end, being development oriented is probably the number one thing that you have out there. I think the moment you think, hey, I got my new job, I'm at the top, I know it all, I'm going to tell you, you're going to fail at that job. You have to keep that humility and that sense of being grounded.
Yeah, from very early in our discussion, you mentioned you wanted to share with us some networking insights. And clearly that's been a big part of your strengths, your career. You're able to do this. Share with us what you will about how important that was. Incredibly
important. So I go back to those foundational years at GE, and that's really, I would say 80% of my network, even today, almost 30 years later, stems from those relationships. Those relationships need to be cultivated. Those relationships need to be 2-way streets. And you don't know how relationships evolve. Every time you have an interaction with someone, and I could tell you someone, it could be at church, it could be at home, it could be at a party you go to, it could be at the office. Every single interaction, you're giving an impression to someone, you're giving something that they'll remember from you, and you never know when those interactions become critical moments in the future. And I say this to the youth a lot now that I have older kids. Take every one of those and make it very meaningful. And how you make them meaningful is by connecting with the person. It's not just sharing something about what's happening. It's having a personal connection. And the reason why I say personal connections matter is because many people meet a lot of people along the way. But how do you become top of mind? How do you become that person that they'll remember, so that when there's a situation that requires throwing in a name for an opportunity, you're being thought of as top of mind? It's not like, oh, I met someone, but I can't even remember. So how do you make yourself memorable? How do you make yourself be remembered? And then comes, of course, the sponsors and the mentors. And there's many mentors, but there's very few sponsors. And be sure that you know who's going to be that reference for that next job. I would argue mentors are probably not it. Sponsors are it. Who are the people who are willing to stick their neck out for you?
Great insight there for us. Thank you for that. I have one last comment. I want to take a shot in the dark. That young person who arrived in Washington so many years ago, she went to American University. I bet you she was thinking international relations, and in some ways, and that's a school known for international relations. I could be completely wrong, but it seems like in some ways your career delivered what perhaps you initially went looking for. How am I doing? Am I close? Am I in terms of international relations and the world at large?
You're close. It was economics because I wanted to give back to others. And I will tell you, it's a very different person. And my evolution, I look back and I don't regret it a bit. I do think my level of confidence, my level of competitiveness was always there, but it grew. My level of ambition was always there, but it grew. The one things that are common, I'm humble, I listen, and I want to make things better. And those are core. And the core values will always be with you. And that's what makes you a person. And that's what makes you who you are. And people should always stay true to their core. Those values should always be with you regardless of what situation you're being put on.
Thank you. We're up to our final question. We're going to just ask you to look forward the next 12 months and share with us, if you would, your priorities as CFO of Pitney Bowes. What would your priorities be?
So my priorities, similar to most of my peers who are CFOs of public companies, are capital allocation. And I'm talking about business priority. With the raise in interest rates and the cost of capital going up, everyone, myself and all my CFO peers, are out there saying, any money we're spending, we're better be spending it for a massive return, because the cost of capital is prime and premium. And we're all here to make those better business outcomes and better business decisions. And how do we partner with our CEOs and the business to deliver that? It's now more than ever more important.
Anna Chadwick, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Thank you.
Hello, Thought Leader listeners. As you have perhaps already heard or even seen, we're now featuring the career lessons and moments of strategic insight shared by our CFO guests as Thought Leader videos. You can now find these videos on our blog at cfothoughtleader.com and, of course, our newsletters, but also on LinkedIn. If you haven't already, please go ahead and follow our CFO Thought Leader LinkedIn company page, and you'll be certain not to miss a single Thought Leader video debut. CFO Thought Leader, the #1 thought leadership platform exclusively for and by CFOs. As always, thank you for listening.